Alright, hello everyone. Long time no see. It's the first video I've made in like 3 weeks. But as you can see, I have a guest with me, although I'm sort of the guest at the house. But anyway, this is Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, who many of you will recognize, since a lot of you who subscribe to my channel also subscribe to his channel probably.
Yeah.
But we're here for sort of a collaboration video, I guess. Where so what we've done for this video together is we've both thought of 5 books that we want adapted into movies, and then we've come up with directors for the movie adaptations who we think would be suitable to adapt the book based on like what the book's about or something like that. And I have also come up with the composers that I would want to do the soundtrack for the movies. I don't know if Jason's done that for all of them, but I've done it for all of them.
I was going to choose actors, but that was just too difficult, so I decided not to.
Yeah. And so we haven't told each other what books we've picked out at all. And so this is going to be kind of interesting to see how each of us reacts to whatever books we pick and whatever directors we pick. And so we're going to go one by one, back and forth. And so I thought that since Jason is the guest on the channel, he would start with his first adaptation. So,
all right. So the first book that I chose to be adapted into a film is Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner, and I thought Ang Lee would be a really, really fine director for that. And my reasoning is that there's a great deal in Angle of Repose about kind of social codes and people kind of breaking free, right, exerting their own wills to break free of these social codes, and that marriage between Oliver Ward and Susan Burling Ward. And if we look at Ang Lee's career, he was addressing very similar things with Brokeback Mountain and Sense and Sensibility, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And then also with Brokeback Mountain, he just revealed that he has a sensitivity to the American West and to not only portraying it, but also to what people's hearts are like in the West. And I also thought it was just, and this didn't figure into my rationale at all, but I thought it was interesting that the first word of the title of the book is basically his name as well, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But that's my first choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
You could it's actually almost his full name because it's Angle, so like you have Ang Lee and L-E at the end of Angle. Yeah, it's a weird meta comment. Cool. Yeah, well, that's good. That's a book I want to read really badly. But,
yeah, well, and hopefully we'll be able to see the film, and it would get Ang Lee's career back on track. He hasn't made something that's been really acclaimed since Life of Pi.
Yeah.
He's made two or three films in a row that have been kind of stinkers and have been box office bombs. So
I just forget that he made Life of Pi. I really liked that book, and I liked the movie too.
Yeah, I've never read the book, but I love the film.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, so it's funny that your first choice was like a American West themed thing, because mine is too. my first book is also very much it takes place a lot in the American West. So the book that I've picked is The Song of the Lark by Willa Cather. Which I've read. Yeah, which you recommended to me. And I actually picked it without thinking about that at all, to be honest. But that's kind of a funny coincidence. So The Song of the Lark is about, this young girl named Thea Kronborg who grows up in this, boondocks town in Colorado, and then is very musically talented, and then eventually becomes this great opera singer who performing on the world stage and so on. And the director who I thought would be good for this would be Kelly Reichardt, because Kelly Reichardt is a director where I've seen like 3 of her movies, and they've all been really good. She's clearly a really good, talented director, a really sensitive director, but she hasn't made anything that's exactly blown me away. And I think if she adapted this, it would be the Kelly Reichardt movie, then it might actually blow me away. But I think too, like most of her films take place in the American West, like Montana and whatever, Oregon and other places. Most of them take place in the American West, and she also really likes telling women-centered stories, and this is a pretty women-centered story. And yeah, I just think she would do a really good job with it. And the composer who I picked out was Ennio Morricone, because he does a lot of soundtracks for westerns.
Yeah.
But also I think it would be a soundtrack where, because it's about an opera singer, a lot of the music would be, stuff by like Gounod and Wagner and Gluck and other pieces of classical music and opera music too.
So there are a few kind of funny coincidences here. So yeah, again, right, just to reiterate, we do not know what we're choosing, what each other's choosing. We did not know what order we're going to be putting things in. And so for your first film to be a film about opera, your first adaptation to be an adaptation in part about opera, Angle of Repose was actually adapted into an opera. It's never been made into a film, to the best of my knowledge, but it was made into an opera. And so I had a long list of possible adaptations, and one of the ones that I didn't choose, so it's not going to be on my list, was an adaptation of My Antonia directed by Kelly Reichardt,
wow.
which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is, when I first read The Song of the Lark, I read it at a time when the actress Emmy Rossum was the right age to play the main character, and she was trained as an opera singer before she got into acting. And I just remember thinking, somebody needs to make this into a film and cast Emmy Rossum in the role, but nobody ever did. And now she's too old. So yeah,
Cool.
that's just hilarious that I was going to choose My Antonia, directed by Kelly Reichardt. Yeah, that's very, very strange. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so my next one would be an adaptation of Independent People, written by Halldór Laxness, the Icelandic writer. And I would have it be directed by Carol Ballard. And Carol Ballard is best known for having directed The Black Stallion and Never Cry Wolf. And he's also well known for directing Fly Away Home, I think it's called, with Anna Paquin. And I checked IMDb this morning, and he's still alive, but he hasn't made a film in quite a long time. He's retired, and he seems to have a lot of scorn for the industry at this time. But the thing about Carol Ballard's films is that they combine a kind of ruggedness with grace in their portraits of the natural world, and also their portraits of the relationship between men and animals, between people and animals. And there's just something about his sensibility, I think, that would be kind of a perfect match for that story. Which is essentially about a very stubborn Icelandic farmer. And there's a quote of his, or attributed to him, that I found on IMDb that I also thought was wonderful and just reminded me a lot of that character in Independent People. And also just the landscape in that book. He said, "Character and a world of its own, those are the things that are most important in any picture. That it takes you into a world of its own that is palpable in some way, that you can practically smell. The same thing with characters. They're not a stock off-the-shelf item. They're unpredictable and ephemeral and interesting and unique." And it sounded like he was talking about a film of independent people. So,
Cool.
So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So my second one is another Western themed thing. So the book is The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy, which is the second novel in his Border trilogy, which all take place sort of close to the border between the United States and Mexico, hence Border trilogy. And The Crossing is the second one. It's the longest one. It's my favorite of the three. And in it, it's about these two brothers, Billy and Bud, I think are their names, who make 3 crossings into Mexico from, I think, New Mexico. And this is a very dark Western, as most of Cormac McCarthy's work is, but it has these great descriptions of the landscape of Mexico and the southwestern U.S., which are just incredibly beautiful. But the director who I decided on was Terrence Malick, because it takes place in such a wonderful landscape, landscape of Mexico. It takes place in a lot of the mountains in Mexico, and a lot of it takes place in the southwestern U.S. And also, like, the first third of the novel is about Billy, I think, like, taming a wolf and befriending the wolf, sort of. and I think it would be cool to see how Terrence Malick would capture that. But I also think it's just the kind of story that Terrence Malick tends to be interested in. He doesn't tend to be interested in straight-laced stories, I guess, and this isn't a straight-laced Western, and it's very dark, and I think Terrence Malick is also very interested in sort of the darker themes of human nature and human life, in addition to this sort of transcendence that's found in his work. And so, yeah, that's why I decided on him. And then the composer I found, I'm not as confident about this composer, but the composer I thought would be interesting is, ironically enough, an Icelandic composer. It's Hildur Gusnadottir. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she has done some soundtracks, but I've only listened to her non-soundtrack music, and it's all this very like dark, dissonant music that sounds sort of like the kind of music that you play when you're walking across a barren wasteland. And I feel like that would be an interesting contrast with the landscape that they're in, but also like resonate with the darkness of the story. And knowing Terrence Malick, he would use a lot of pieces of classical music as well as the soundtrack. So, yeah.
Another funny thing about that, it's weird, the synchronicity is so strange, is I had mentioned Carol Ballard's early film, Never Cry Wolf, which is in part about a man who befriends a wolf. That's very weird too. Part of me wonders if we communicate too much, right? Like, I mean, we have some kind of I don't know, connection or some filament between our brains or something.
ESP.
That's wild.
It's ESP. Extrasensory perception.
Yeah. A hive mind. Something like this. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I wondered if he was going to appear on your list. Part of me is curious to know what Terrence Malick would do something like Blood Meridian.
Oh, God.
Actually.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
All right, so my next one is, my next adaptation is The Wake, a novel written by Paul Kingsnorth. And The Wake is, I can't remember what century it's set in. I want to say it's set in like 9th century Britain or something like that, maybe 10th century Britain, maybe 8th century Britain. And it's written in a kind of approximation, Paul Kingsnorth's approximation of the vernacular of that time, what it would be like. And when you start reading it for about 10 pages, you're thinking, I can't get through this. There's no way, I don't understand what the hell's being said. And there's even a glossary at the back of the book with the definitions of, or the contemporary English definitions of the words that he's created. And I thought a perfect director for that would be Robert Eggers, who directed The Witch and The Lighthouse, which are also these kind of intimate historical dramas, but they're both films where Eggers has made a point of kind of approximating a kind of linguistic, I don't know, just the feeling of the language of the times in which those two films are set. One is set in kind of pre-colonial or colonial America, and then the other is set in 19th century kind of East Coast America with The Lighthouse. So, yeah, he seemed kind of a perfect choice for The Wake.
So those are both horror films. Does the book have, like, horror elements at all?
Well, I think The Witch is kind of a horror film. The Lighthouse is more just, I think The Lighthouse, I don't know that I would classify it as horror so much as just psychological... Thriller, maybe, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there are elements of horror to it. But yeah, to say that there are elements in The Wake that are intense and dark and kind of sinister, yeah, there's certainly something there to that. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about maybe writing a letter to Robert Eggers through his agent and suggesting that he adapt The Wake.
Yeah.
But that's my third choice.
Well, that sounds cool. You've recommended those books to me, because it's a trilogy, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah, and I've only read the first book, but they don't all take place at the same time. So the second novel, I think, is called Beast, and it is set in contemporary times. But the protagonist of that is a kind of a contemporary version of Buckmaster, who's the main character in The Wake. And then the third novel, which I can't remember the title of, is set in the distant future.
Oh.
So
wow, that sounds cool.
Yeah, Kingsnorth is a very interesting
Yeah,
very interesting writer.
I definitely want to read that. Yeah, the title of the first one, The Wake, of course, makes me think of Finnegan's Wake, but because Finnegan's Wake is also written in a weird
I
language.
never thought about that.
Yeah.
I never made that connection that he might be kind of alluding to Finnegan's Wake as well.
Yeah.
I bet he is, actually. Huh?
Yeah. Cool. So, my third choice is, I think, a novella. It's a novella that I don't think I've actually ever even talked about on my channel. All the other things I'm talking about, I know I've talked about at some length or another on my channel, but this book I don't think I've ever discussed in depth. So the novel is called Reunion by Fred Uhlman.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, so this is a novella it takes place in the late 1930s in Germany, when, obviously a lot is going on, and it's about a, early teenage Jewish boy who starts to become very close friends with a non-Jewish German boy who is the son of a very rich family, and they become very close, and then the Jewish boy finds out that the rich German boy's family parents just happen to be very prominent members of the Nazi Party, and not just they're members and they vote. They're these prominent donors who were invited to have dinner with Hitler, and so they're very much Nazis. And so it's about that, and it's a really powerful, very short novel, and so the director, who I decided on, isn't going to make you very happy. The director is Paweł Pawlikowski, who has directed two movies that I love, one of which is one of my favorites of all time, the other of which I just sort of love, but isn't necessarily favorite
But
of all time.
he'd be good at that, though.
Yeah, he does good stories like that, I think, and good kind of very tragic stories, the stories where relationships never quite work out. He's a Polish director. And all the two films I've seen by him are both in Polish, but I think he's done films in English too. But I think it's the kind of story that he would like to direct. And one of your criticisms of Pawlikowski is that he's not the best writer, best screenwriter. And
yes.
I guess I would disagree with you, of course. But if we accept for a second that that's true, then kind of having a story handed to him through a book might improve that, because he'll have a structure of a story to work with. But God, he just knows how to shoot a visually beautiful movie, and to tell a tragic story. And this is a relatively tragic story. So
it should be shot in black and white as well.
Yeah.
He doesn't always work in black and white, but those two films, Cold War and Ida, are both in black and white. Mm-hmm. This sounds like this would be a good fit for that too.
Yeah, definitely. And the composer I decided on, again, not as confident about this, but I decided on James Newton Howard.
We did the Hidden Life.
Yeah, right? And it was mostly because of his soundtrack for Hidden Life that I thought he would be good for this. Because Hidden Life 2 is about about a couple who have sort of a almost paradisical existence in this town, and then it's ruined by the Nazis. And this story too has this blossoming of this friendship that's then soiled by Nazism, and it seems like he might do a good job. So
yeah. Well, I like that. That sounds like a good book, man. All right, so my next choice would be Gilead, written by Marilynne Robinson, right? Her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about the Reverend John Ames, and I would have it be directed by Terrence Malick. Part of me wondered if we were both going to choose Gilead and both assign Terrence Malick to it. And this is something I've thought about for years, that I'd love to see him tackle that novel. There's something about that novel. There's something really. There's a kind of drifting kind of pace to it. It's also a very associative novel and a very reflective novel. And these are all adjectives that I would use to describe his particular style of cinema as well. Plus, he is a religious man, and he's made a number of films that deal very seriously and thoughtfully with religion. And, of course, religion is front and center in Gilead. And, I'd just like to see what he could do with the American Midwest, with that particular landscape as well. Yeah. And kind of folding in these theological concerns and ideas. Yeah. And also just the sense of childhood, right? He gave us, in the Tree of Life, so many kind of wonderful little portraits of children as well. It would be cool to see, how he could give us the young son of Reverend Ames through the eyes of a man who was about to die.
Yeah.
I think that would be really interesting. But.
And I think too, I mean, Gilead is written in a certain style where I think there's a lot of material, like, I'm thinking about Terrence Malick's use of the voiceover constantly. I feel like there's a lot in Gilead that almost sounds like a voiceover, like it would be a voiceover. So there's a lot of sort of material there for those voiceovers. That's, again, very meditative and introspective. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I like
go on.
I like the idea of seeing how Terrence Malick would capture Iowa, especially having now lived in Iowa for 3 years and lived in Illinois too for 2 years.
Yeah,
I might just be interested in that. Yeah.
Well, there's something about the fellow who directed Pavel Koski. My criticism of him that you brought out that having an extant narrative work to kind of build his film on, I think that helps Terrence Malick as well. I think when he's kind of left to his own, devices and we're not going to have a script, we're just going to improvise everything, and we're going to give the cameras to the actors and stuff. It tends not to work very well. But when he has a story like whether it's the novel The Thin Red Line or the story of Franz Jägerstätter, right, et cetera, I think that having an extant narrative kind of framework, I think helps him rein in some of his less than perfect impulses, I suppose.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Cool. So my next to last one is one of my favorite books of all time. It actually appeared on my top 10 for the top 10 stack. The book is The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut.
I've read that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. Do you like it?
I do.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
A comic science fiction novel. This guy named Malachi Constant goes on this kind of journey that lands him eventually at the end of the novel on Titan, the moon of Saturn. But there's a lot that goes on in between. At one point, Earth is invaded by Martians, and I think Malachi spends like a year or maybe even a few years on Mercury with these like weird extraterrestrials that like sing on one note for months on end and make this weird music over the course of eternity. And it's a very but it also has kind of a bit of a family drama, a bit of a Dostoevskian family drama with Malachi and his father and whatnot. And anyway, but it's very comic. There's a lot of comedy to it, as there tends to be in Vonnegut. And the director who I decided on is Andrew Niccol, who and primarily I picked him on the strength of Gattaca, which he directed.
He wrote The Truman Show, didn't he? I think he wrote The Truman Show.
Oh,
maybe. I'm not sure.
Then great. But primarily I picked him because of Gattaca, which is a science fiction film like starring Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman. And what I liked about Gattaca is just how human it is. Some science fiction films and books are a little like cold. They're so up in their ideas that there's not a beating heart to the story, and the characters don't always feel like real people. And Gattaca felt very much like a science fiction story with a very interesting science fiction idea, but that remembered that you have to have actual people in your story, and your story needs to be about people. And it's just beautiful visually, and I think Sirens of Titan has a lot of potential in it to create a very just visually beautiful film. A little bit like, think of 2001: A Space Odyssey and how that was so beautiful with the spaceships and seeing the planets and the weird trippy stuff near the end and whatnot. There's just a lot of potential for it. So I would want Andrew Niccol to direct it. And the composer who I decided on was another Icelander, Jóhann Jóhannsson. The thing I'd be particularly interested to see him do is those creatures on Mercury who are like singing this like really drawn out whatever you want to call it, symphony or whatever, where they'll like be stuck on one note for months on end, and I would be really interested to hear how Johansson would create that sound, because he's done like electronic music. He's done like his soundtrack for Arrival, and some of his own music is very electronic, and I feel like he could use those abilities to create that soundscape, and I think that could be particularly cool. But also even when he's not doing weird electronic music, he makes really lovely music. So and he's done a few science fiction films even. So yeah.
He is a perfect choice of composer for that project, I think. And actually thinking about it, if Andrew Niccol did write The Truman Show, which I think he did, that is one more check in his favor for directing The Sirens of Titan, because if memory serves, I read it a long time ago. I think it was in graduate school. There's something kind of zany about that novel too, and even a little comic in places. And The Truman Show is nothing if not zany and comic.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I really like that adaptation. That's very nice. Very, very good. Cool. All right. So my last one, I saved it for last because I think it's in some ways the most surprising of my choices. So I recently read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And while I was reading it, Kelly and I watched, for the first time, we watched the film Wolfwalkers, directed by Tom Moore and Ross Stewart, and just loved Wolfwalkers. And after watching Wolfwalkers, when I would read Hamlet, it was weird. It's the only time in my life this has ever happened to me. You know, I usually kind of see, you know, as I'm reading a book, I usually see the film of it in my head. I even cast actors when I'm reading the novel, and I started seeing the novel in their animation style as I was reading it, which was bizarre, but it worked. Like, it just really, really worked, you know. And I think that there's something so emotionally mature about Wolfwalkers, and there's something kind of so rustic and almost folksy, like a kind of folktale kind of feeling about their animation style in that film, that I just thought it would work with Hamlet, you know. And frankly, you know, why should animated films be the province of children alone, right? In the province of kind of jokes and comedy and this, that, and the other thing. Like, why can't we have an adaptation of a novel that is very much so about marriage and about grief, and have it be animated? I think that would be a really interesting idea, you know, to have an animated film that is about those things, that doesn't introduce magical creatures or anything like that, that is just, yeah, about this family's struggle with loss and with suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my last one.
Well, I think adult animation for adults is a really cool section of the film world that doesn't get that much attention.
Yeah.
And I think is a shame. And I haven't explored it to the degree that I would like, because I love animation. But yeah, like, I mean, something like Persepolis or like Waking Life, like like, I think really interesting stuff can be done with adult animation. And yeah, it's like a shame how like people just automatically associate animated films with children's stories. Like,
yeah.
Like it gets frustrating when I try to get someone to watch like Japanese anime, right? And for some reason they don't think that kind of a movie will be as interesting. It's just like, well, I mean, the movie's a very adult story. It just happens to be anime, you know? Yeah. All right, so my very last pick is was also one of my favorite books of all time. So and calling it a book is a bit odd because it comes to us in fragments, and it's not a novel. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh. So going right back to the beginning of literature. I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is such a powerful story. Like, I was so surprised by just how powerful the story it was. It really is. Yeah, it's like in a way the best story that I've read, because it's so simple. But the director that I found is a bit of a risk, because originally I was counting on us having gone to see The Green Knight, which just came out before we did this video, so that I can confirm that this is the director who I want. Because the director who I want is David Lowery, and I was going to decide whether or not I wanted to finalize that decision after seeing The Green Knight, because I think if you can do something interesting with The Green Knight, which is based on Gawain and the Green Knight, the 14th or so century anonymous poem about Gawain, if he can do something really interesting with that, then I think he could do something really interesting with this old narrative poem. And in addition to that, when I look at something like A Ghost Story, which is about sort of death and loss and time, and is this very sort of enigmatic look at the human condition, I think that tells me too that he would do Gilgamesh well, because it too is about, you know, life and death, and basically Gilgamesh is about death, about the desire to escape death. And I think it would be interesting, having gone from directing a movie that's about ghosts to directing a movie about a person who's alive who wants to escape death. So those are the two things that make me want to pick David Lowery, and I mean, he's just a very talented young filmmaker. So he's my director. And then my composer is Max Richter, who I think he writes such powerful, touching music. And Gilgamesh is a story also about loss and about death, and so I think his music would suit the story really well.
I don't know the composer.
Max Richter?
That doesn't ring any bells.
Huh.
I mean, maybe I do, and I'm just blanking.
Maybe I need to... If I played some of his music, you might write... Some of his music was used in Arrival.
Okay.
So maybe I can show you one of his pieces, and you'll probably recognize it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, you know, so we're going to see The Green Knight tomorrow. We were going to see it last night, but then we moved that to tomorrow. So, but Gawain and The Green Knight, I mean, even that poem deals with these same ideas that you're talking about. Yeah. You know, the kind of strangeness of time and mortality and so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how you feel about your Gilgamesh adaptation idea after we watch The Green Knight.
Yeah.
This was fun, man.
Yep.
So this was all Lukash's idea. You know, he sent me this message on Voxer, and he's like, "What would you think if we did a video where we, you know, dream up our perfect adaptations of certain novels and assign them directors?" And that's just the kind of thing that I kind of geek out about anyway. And so I just love the idea. And this was a lot of fun to think of these. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for doing the video.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out to see us.
Yeah. Yeah. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Let us know if you have thoughts on any of these, if you've read the books or seen any of the movies by the directors we mentioned.
Or if you would go see these films.
Or, yeah, if you would go see the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, bye everyone.
Adios.